Let me tell y'all something right now. When a mother starts feeling that pinch in her spirit, the one that whispers something ain't right, child, you better sit up straight and listen. Because the day my son told me he was just checking the brakes on my car, I thought it was sweet. But 3 hours later, when I found that little tracking device tucked up under my bumper and the phone rang with news that nearly buckled my knees, oh honey, life shifted. And it shifted hard. See, I'm Auntie May, and if there's one thing I've learned after a lifetime of watching people pretend to be one thing while doing another, it's this right here: truth don't hide. Truth always leaks through the cracks like light in a boarded up window. I don't care how careful folks think they are, how clever they think they sound, or how innocent they try to act. Eventually their intentions spill right out in your lap. And that weak, child, let me tell you, I felt life trying to tap me on the shoulder. A quiet warning, a soft nudge. You ever get that feeling? Your gut telling you, baby, pay attention. Your nerves whispering, sugar, look again. That was me, because my son, my sweet baby, my grown man, my pride, had been acting different. Sharp 1 minute, distant the next. And then came that business with my brakes. So sit back, lean in, and let me walk you through exactly what happened. Because what looked like a simple favor turned into one of the most eye-opening days of my life. When I tell you that I know my car, I mean I know her like she is an extension of my own breath. I know the weight of her doors and the rhythm of her engine and the faint little hum she gives when she settles at a stoplight. I know the way she shifts when I turn onto the old road behind the grocery store, and I know the slight tug she gives when the wind is sharp. So when the brakes felt wrong that morning, it was not some tiny detail I could brush off. It was a bone-deep recognition that something familiar had turned unfamiliar. It felt like a trusted friend speaking in a voice I had never heard before, and that alone was enough to make my spirit sit up straight. I pressed my foot down, expecting the usual steady resistance. Instead, the pedal sank farther than it should, and it sank with a softness that did not match my car at all. I eased to a stop, but the whole time I felt this strange flutter in my chest, as though something small and quiet had slipped out of place. At first I thought it might be the cold morning air, or maybe a bit of dust that fell just right into the system, or perhaps the car simply needed a tune-up. Yet the longer I drove, the more the wrongness echoed through the vehicle. You know how sometimes you feel a shift in the air even before you see the storm? That is exactly what it felt like. A silent warning that something beneath the surface had changed. I kept driving, but every time I tapped the brake I felt that soft sinking sensation again. It was as if the car was trying to tell me something in a whisper. Something faint yet urgent. And I listened, because I have learned to respect those quiet warnings. Life spends years trying to teach you how to notice the difference between a small inconvenience and a sign that you need to pay attention. That morning every slight shift in the brake pedal felt like a sign. So when I got back home, I called my son, who has always been good with tools and engines. He has always been the type who could break something apart and put it back together with a cleaner finish than before. When he was younger, he would sit on the porch and take apart old radios we found at yard sales. I used to fuss and say he was turning the house into a scrap yard, but secretly I loved watching him work like that. He had this look of total focus that made him seem older than he was. That same focus turned him into a man who knew how to fix almost anything mechanical. So I asked him if he could check the brakes because something felt off. I expected him to say sure and maybe tease me a little, because he knows I notice every little thing about that car. But when I mentioned it, his voice changed. It dipped real low, like he got caught off guard. There was this tiny pause, almost invisible yet heavy enough to make my instincts flare. He said, "I got you, Ma," and tried to smile, but the smile did not reach his eyes. And that right there is what made my heart pull tight. When your own child looks at you with forced calm, you feel it before you understand it. It hits your soul before it hits your brain. He went outside and opened the hood, even though the brakes have nothing to do with the engine. I stood by the kitchen window pretending to rinse dishes, but really I was watching him. He was not moving with his usual easy confidence. He looked stiff, almost tense, like he was checking things he already knew were fine. He kept glancing around too, as though he expected something or someone to show up out of nowhere. I could feel the tension from inside the house, like a thread pulled too tight. He finally came back inside after a long while and said it was nothing, but he would take care of it. I asked if he was sure and he said yes, but again that answer came out too quick. Too light, like he had rehearsed it. I told myself maybe he was just tired or stressed or lost in his own world. Kids these days carry a lot in their heads and sometimes they do not share everything with their parents. But the truth is that deepest part of me, the part that has lived long enough to recognize fear, was whispering, "Pay attention, baby, pay attention." Later that day I drove out to run a few errands and the brakes felt the same. Not worse, not better, just wrong. A little too soft, a little too delayed, and my mind kept replaying that look on my son's face. That half smile that did not shine the way it usually did. Something was weighing on him. Something he did not want to talk about. Something he thought he could fix without involving me. Mothers know when their children are hiding pain. Even grown children cannot hide that tremble in their spirit no matter how hard they try. On my way back home I hit a quiet stretch of road and tested the brakes again. I pressed gently then firmly. Still wrong. Still soft. Still unfamiliar. It made me grip the wheel tighter because cars do not suddenly change without a reason. Brakes do not shift overnight without some cause. And my son had been the last one to touch the car. The thought did not scare me, but it made me uneasy. The kind of uneasiness that slides into your mind and settles there like a weight you carry even when you try to ignore it. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment just listening to the ticking of the cooling motor. Something inside told me to take a deeper look. Not at the brakes but at the whole situation. Because the brakes were just the part one could feel. The real issue was hidden beneath the surface. In the silence that hung between my son and me. In the strange tension in his voice. In the subtle way he had been moving through the house lately. As I stepped out of the car I felt a shift in the air. Not a physical shift but an emotional one. Like the beginning of understanding had started pressing at the edges of my mind. Something was wrong, not just with the brakes but with the entire situation. And I decided right then that I was not going to let whatever it was unfold without me seeing it for what it truly was. I love my son more than I love my own breath, but love does not blind me. Love sharpens me. Love teaches me to look closer and listen harder. And in that moment the car, the brakes, the sudden tension in his voice all felt like puzzle pieces waiting to be placed together. I knew I needed to pay attention. I knew something deeper was brewing. And I knew this was only the beginning of a day that would change everything. There comes a moment in every life when instinct takes the driver's seat and logic moves aside. That was the moment for me when something inside whispered, "Go look again. Go check the car, not the brakes, not the tires, not the engine, but the whole car." It felt strange because I had already checked. My son had already checked. Yet something in my spirit would not sit still. It kept tugging at me like a small persistent hand trying to guide me toward the truth. So I walked outside with no real plan and no real idea of what I expected to find. I only knew that something felt unfamiliar and that feeling needed an answer. The afternoon light stretched across the driveway in a soft yellow haze as I approached the car. Nothing looked unusual, nothing seemed out of place. It was the same car I had driven for years, with the same little scratches on the door and the same tiny dent near the taillight from that time a shopping cart rolled the wrong way. Everything appeared normal, yet the uneasiness in my chest kept rising. I stood there for a long moment just observing the car like it was a stranger wearing a familiar face. I could not place the feeling exactly, but I knew not to ignore it. I walked around to the front of the car and ran my hand over the hood. The metal felt warm from the sun. I crouched in front of the bumper even though the brakes were not located there. I checked anyway because instinct does not follow logic. Instinct follows truth. Nothing looked off, so I moved to the passenger side and knelt down again. Still nothing. The longer I searched the more I felt like something was watching me. Not a person but a truth waiting to be discovered. A truth tucked just out of sight. When I finally reached the back of the car my steps slowed. The back bumper had always been a little tricky. There were narrow spaces and small panels that dust liked to collect in. As I crouched down the air felt different. Heavier. I reached under the bumper with my fingertips and felt nothing but smooth plastic at first. Then I shifted my hand slightly to the left and my heart kicked hard in my chest. There was something there, something that did not belong. Something small and solid and cold to the touch. I pulled my hand back quickly, then paused in shock. For a moment I just stared at the underside of the bumper trying to steady my breath. I reached again, this time slower, and brushed against the object once more. It was clipped onto the frame with a tight, secure fit, like it had been placed there with intention. I felt a chill roll down my back because I already knew this was not part of my car. I had never seen it before. My son had never mentioned it. No one had any reason to put anything under my car. I reached far enough to grip the edge of the object and gently pulled. It gave some resistance before snapping loose into my hand. I held it up in the sunlight and my heart nearly stopped. A small black device no bigger than a matchbox. Smooth, no markings, no brand, no indicator lights. Just a silent little box that carried the weight of 1,000 questions. I did not need instructions, labels, or explanations to understand exactly what it was. It was a tracker, a tracking device, a device meant to follow me without my knowledge. My breath came in slow, shaky waves as the truth began settling in. Someone had been watching my movements. Someone had been keeping track of where I went and when. Someone had placed this thing under my car and had expected me to never discover it. The realization hit with a force so sharp it made my hands tremble. For a long moment I could not move. I just stared at the little device like it was a piece of evidence in a mystery I never asked to be part of. My mind spun through questions with no pauses. Who put it there? When did they put it there? Why my car? Why me? Why now? And the question that felt like a needle in my chest trembled its way to the front. Did my son know? He had been the last one to touch the car. He had been acting strange. His voice, his eyes, his posture all carried a tension I could not name. Was he trying to protect me? Was he hiding something from me? Or was he hiding something from someone else? I did not want to believe he had anything to do with this, yet the timing was too sharp to ignore. I looked back toward the house and felt a wave of confusion wash over me. I knew I had to be careful. I knew I could not jump to conclusions no matter how strong the fear in my chest felt. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. Panic helps no one, especially not a mother trying to understand the truth behind something she did not ask for. I ran my thumb across the smooth surface of the device and the silence around me grew heavier. Everything felt too still. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world itself is holding its breath. I stood slowly and glanced up and down the street. Nothing moved, no neighbors outside, no cars driving by, just stillness. That stillness wrapped itself around my thoughts and made the reality of the situation sink deeper. Someone had been watching me, watching enough to place a tracker under my vehicle, watching enough to think they could follow me without being caught. I felt anger rise behind the fear. Not loud anger, not explosive anger, a deep, steady kind of anger that comes from being violated. Someone trying to keep tabs on me was not just unsettling. It was disrespectful, it was invasive, it was dangerous, and I refused to let danger sit quietly in my life without confronting it. As I walked back toward the house, the device felt heavier and heavier in my hand. I could feel the truth pressing in from all sides. I needed answers, I needed clarity, and standing in the driveway holding a secret someone else placed in my life was not going to give me either. I reached the porch steps and stopped. My son was inside. I could hear the faint sound of the television from the living room. A normal sound on a day that had shifted into something far from normal. Before going inside, I looked down at the tracker again. It felt cold even in the warm afternoon air. Cold like the intentions behind it. Cold like the fear blooming in my stomach. Cold like the possibility that someone had placed it there for reasons I did not yet understand. I stood there for a while, letting the weight of that truth settle into my mind. I knew this discovery was not the end of it. It was the beginning of a storm I did not see coming, but one I could no longer avoid. I walked inside knowing nothing would be simple after this moment. The truth was unfolding and the tracker was the first piece. The breaks were not the real issue. The real issue was who was watching and why. And I knew deep down that whatever came next I would have to face it with all the strength I had left, because this was not just a device. This was a warning, and warnings rarely arrive without reason. When I stepped back into the house holding that little black device, my heart felt like it was beating in a room with no windows. Everything inside me tightened with a kind of fear that does not scream but whispers. The kind that makes you walk slower, breathe deeper, listen harder. My son was sitting on the couch with the television playing some show he was not even watching. His eyes were fixed forward yet unfocused, like his mind was somewhere far outside the walls of our home. I stood in the doorway for a long moment just watching him. Studying him, searching his face for any hint of truth or guilt or fear. Something inside me told me that he knew more than he had said. That he had been carrying a weight he could not name. A weight he hoped I would never see. I walked toward him with careful steps, the tracker resting heavy in my hand. My breath came slow because I knew once I asked the question there would be no going back. Once the truth started unraveling, it would not stop until everything tangled inside it spilled into the open. I stood in front of him and he finally looked up. His eyes flickered with something sharp and brief before he smoothed his expression into something neutral. Too neutral. Neutral enough to worry me. I held out my hand silently and let him see the device. His face did not change at first, but then his gaze tightened almost imperceptibly. That tiny shift hit me harder than a shout would have. He knew what it was. He recognized it, and that recognition made my stomach twist. I asked him in a soft, steady voice, "Baby, did you put this on my car?" He did not answer. Not immediately. He looked at the device, then looked away, then looked back, like he was searching for a version of the truth that would not hurt either of us. But some truths have no gentle version. Some truths cut no matter how slowly they are spoken. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. He pressed his lips together, then inhaled deeply like he was preparing to dive underwater. His silence was louder than any confession. It filled the room with a thick, heavy dread. I could feel the truth sitting between us like a shadow that was growing larger by the second. I asked again, a little firmer this time. "Did you put this under my car?" Still he said nothing. He only stared at the device like it had turned into a live snake that could strike at any moment. His silence unnerved me because it was not the silence of someone ignorant. It was the silence of someone trapped by his own choices. I felt my voice trembling at the edges as I asked him why. Why would you do that? Why would you keep something like this from me? Why would you act like everything was fine when clearly it was not? And the hardest question of them all rose out of me like a whisper from a wound. What are you mixed up in, baby? What are you afraid of? His eyes filled with something painful and raw. Something he did not want me to see. He shook his head slowly like he was trying to deny the truth without speaking it. Like saying it aloud would make everything crash down around him. That look tore through me. It felt like watching my child drown in a river while trying to convince me he was fine. I reached out and touched his arm gently, hoping it would open him up. Hoping it would break whatever dam he had built around his heart. He finally whispered, "I can't tell you. I cannot tell you." The words were faint but they sliced through the air like a blade. I felt a chill climb up my spine because those words never come from something small. They come from danger, from fear, from consequences that stand tall enough to shake a grown man. I asked him what could possibly be so bad that he could not tell his own mother. But he only closed his eyes and shook his head again. He looked lost, absolutely lost, like he had wandered too far down a road he never meant to take. I felt frustration rising with the fear, not anger at him but at the situation, at the unknown, at the fact that there was a threat near my child, near my home, near my life, and I did not even know its name. I raised my voice slightly and said, "You need to tell me what this is. You need to tell me what is happening. You need to tell me who put this on my car. Because someone put it there, and if it was not you, then someone else followed me. Someone else is watching me. Someone else is tracking my life, and that is not a small thing. That is not something you hide. That is not something you protect me from by staying silent." My son finally looked at me with tears forming in his eyes. I had not seen that look on his face since he was a little boy who had fallen and scraped his knee and tried to be brave about it. Except this time the wound was deeper, older, more dangerous. He opened his mouth again, and this time his voice came out unsteady. He said, "Ma, I messed up. I messed up real bad." I asked him how, and he wiped his face with the back of his hand like a man trying to erase a mistake he could not fix. He said, "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could fix it before it touched you. I thought I could keep you safe by keeping you out of it." His voice cracked and my heart cracked with it. Because he was not just scared. He was ashamed. Ashamed of a choice he made. Ashamed of a path he could not walk backward. Ashamed of bringing danger close to his mother even if he thought he could prevent it from reaching me. I pressed the tracker into his hand gently. Not angry, not accusing, just needing the truth. I told him, baby, whatever you did, whatever this is, we will face it together. You do not protect me by hiding the danger. You protect me by letting me know it is there. But he looked at me with a sorrow that felt ancient. He said, it is too late for that. It is already in motion. I tried to stop it. But I couldn't. Those words sank into me like stones dropped into deep water. Too late. Already in motion. Tried to stop it. Couldn't. Each phrase carried the weight of something irreversible. Something bigger than both of us. Something that had already reached my car and now had a grip on my life whether I understood it yet or not. I felt my knees weaken slightly as the fear wrapped around my chest. I asked him again, what is happening? What have you gotten into? Who are you mixed up with? But he only shook his head and whispered, I can't say their name. I can't, Ma. If I say it out loud it makes it real. And if it becomes real it becomes dangerous for you. That was when I realized the truth he would not speak was darker than I imagined. That whatever he knew, whatever he had done, whatever threats hung over him were not small, not foolish, not fixable with a conversation. His silence was no longer stubborn. It was terrified, and that told me the truth was tied to people who did not forgive. People who did not forget. People who watched and followed and tracked. And as I stood there, the tracker still cold in my palm, I understood that the danger was not coming. It was already here, in my home, in my driveway, in my son's trembling voice, in the shadows he was too afraid to name. There are phone calls that ring through the air like ordinary sounds, and then there are phone calls that cut through your life like a blade. The kind that make your breath catch before you even lift the phone. The kind that make the world around you freeze for a moment, that feels too long, too heavy, too sharp. That afternoon, 3 hours after I found the tracker, 3 hours after my son sat on the couch with fear written in every quiet part of his body, that call came. And the sound of it made my heart twist like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed. I had been pacing the living room trying to process everything, my mind running in frantic circles searching for answers that refused to come. My son had withdrawn into himself again, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together, head down like a man waiting on judgment. Neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The air in the house felt too tight, too still, too full of unspoken truth. Every few minutes I glanced at the tracker sitting on the coffee table, its dark smooth surface gleaming in the dim light. A small object with a monstrous shadow. When the phone rang, its sharp tone sliced the silence clean open. I felt my body jolt as though the sound had reached straight through my skin. I looked toward the phone and something cold crept up my spine. My son lifted his head and the look in his eyes gutted me. Pure dread, not surprise, not confusion, dread, like he had been waiting for this ring the whole time, waiting for the moment everything he feared would catch up with him. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. I pressed it to my ear with a hesitance that felt heavy and slow. My voice barely worked as I said hello. On the other end an unfamiliar voice responded in a tone so serious it made my throat tighten. The person identified themselves as a detective, and in that instant it felt like the floor under me shifted. I stood frozen, unable to speak for a moment. My breath came in a shaky gasp. I knew then that the tracker had not been random. This was not some mistake or misunderstanding. Something connected to danger had touched my life without permission. The detective asked to confirm my name and I said yes, though my voice felt thin and weak. My son was watching me, his eyes wide, filled with fear that mirrored my own. The detective then asked me if I owned a car fitting the description of mine. I said yes again, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through my ribs. He told me my car had been flagged earlier that day by a surveillance team monitoring a location under investigation. My hands began to sweat as my grip on the phone loosened. I asked what that meant, though part of me already understood. He told me the vehicle had triggered a signal when it approached an area linked to illegal activity and that the tracker placed under my car was connected to an ongoing case. My vision blurred for a second as if the room had tilted sideways. I asked how long the device had been on my car. He said the system showed activation 2 days ago. 2 days. I felt a sting behind my eyes as fear tightened my chest. 2 days of being tracked. 2 days of someone knowing everywhere I went. 2 days of my life being monitored without my knowledge, without my consent. I looked at my son and saw him break inside. Not outwardly but in his eyes. They hardened with a mixture of regret and resignation. The detective continued speaking with a steady professionalism that made the truth feel even heavier. He said they had reason to believe the device had been placed on my vehicle as part of an attempt to either follow me or use me without my awareness in relation to someone connected to their investigation. He said it was possible that the tracker was placed to monitor someone associated with me. The moment he said that, my gaze locked onto my son. The truth hit me with a force that almost knocked the breath out of my lungs. I asked if my son was in danger. My voice cracked as I said it. The detective paused before answering. That pause told me everything. It was a pause heavy with things he could not say or was not allowed to say. He told me my son needed to come in for questioning. Needed, not wanted. Needed. That word punched through the air like a hammer. I felt my knees weaken and I had to grip the counter to keep myself from falling. My son closed his eyes like he had been expecting those very words. I asked if he was being accused of something. The detective said he could not disclose details over the phone but emphasized the importance of cooperation and safety. The word safety echoed in my mind, leaving behind a cold ache. I looked around the room, suddenly hyper aware of every shadow, every sound, every corner. Safety had been taken from us long before the phone rang. I just had not known it. I told the detective I had the tracker in my possession. His tone sharpened as he told me not to tamper with it further and to bring it in when we arrived. I asked him why someone would place it under my car. He hesitated again, then said something that made my blood run cold. He said sometimes people close to individuals under suspicion are used without their knowledge. Used to transport information or used to draw someone out or used to locate them. His voice softened slightly as he said it was possible the person behind this device believed I would lead them somewhere useful. I felt sick. Completely sick. The idea that someone had used my car, my movements, my daily routine as part of something dangerous made me feel violated in a way I had never felt before. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout. I wanted to shake my son and demand he tell me everything he had been hiding. But I could not do any of those things while the detective was talking. My voice barely held steady as I asked what we should do next. He told me we needed to come down to the station immediately. When I hung up the phone, the silence in the room swelled again, but this time it was different. It was not heavy with unspoken fear. It was heavy with truth. Raw, sharp truth. I turned slowly to face my son. He sat perfectly still, too still, like he was trying not to break in front of me. I walked toward him, trying to steady my breath. I placed the phone on the table next to the tracker. The two objects sat side by side like symbols of everything that had just unraveled. I whispered, "What did you do, baby? What did you get involved in?" My voice was shaking like a fragile thread ready to snap. He did not look away. He did not deny anything. He did not offer excuses. He simply whispered, "I thought I could fix it before it touched you. I thought I had time." Time. That word, hollow and painful, echoed in my mind. He had thought he had time. But danger does not wait. Danger does not pause. Danger moves like a shadow, always one step behind your mistakes, ready to catch up when you least expect it. I told him the detective wanted him at the station. For a moment he just stared at me, his eyes filled with a mix of fear, shame, and something else I could not name. He nodded slowly like a man who had run out of choices. A man who knew the storm had arrived and there was no more hiding from it. We stood there together in the middle of the living room, the air thick with fear, truth, and dread. The phone call did not just deliver news. It delivered a reckoning. And nothing after that moment could ever go back to the way it had been. When the fifth truth finally rose up in front of me, it did not whisper and it did not knock gentle on the door of my thoughts. It came roaring in like a storm that had waited too long to speak and now refused to be quiet. And the truth was this: there comes a moment in every story where fear can no longer be the loudest voice, and that is exactly the moment I stepped into when I stood in the middle of that dim hallway with the phone sliding out of my trembling hand while my heart slammed hard against my ribs like it was trying to break free, because in that moment I realized that this situation stuck stopped being about suspicion or checking brakes or finding a tracker or wondering why my son had been acting so strange. This was bigger than all that. This was the moment I had to choose what kind of mother I really was. Not the pretty kind that smiles in photos, not the polite kind that pretends everything is fine, but the kind that is ready to walk straight into fire if that is what it takes to protect her child and find the truth. See, that call I got 3 hours after finding that little cold blinking tracker in the wheel well of my car was not a call I ever wanted to receive, because when I answered I expected to hear my son's voice or at least the sound of someone explaining something that could make sense, but instead I heard a stranger breathing fast like he was running from something, and his voice cracked as he said, "Mom, you need to come now, and I do not know how to tell you this, but your son has been in an accident." And for one split second the world stopped turning right there under my feet. The walls of the house tilted like the world had been pushed sideways, and every fear I had tried so hard to silence came flooding up from the floor and wrapped its cold fingers around my throat. But even in that panic something else rose up inside me, something older than worry, something deeper than fear, and that was the pure unstoppable fire that only a mother can feel when her child might be in danger. I grabbed my keys and flew out the door before the air even settled behind me, and every step felt like I was fighting darkness with nothing but the strength in my chest and the name of my child on my lips, because when love is powerful it becomes a force all its own, and it pushes you forward even when your knees are weak and your mind is screaming for a moment to catch its breath. I got into the car that he had worked on earlier that day, and for one heartbeat I froze, because that tracker he had placed on it was still in my purse, and I looked at it like it might speak, like it might tell me why he had done it, why he felt he needed to watch me or protect me or follow me without saying a word. But the car started up clean and smooth like nothing was wrong, and that hit me in the chest again, because he had checked those brakes with care. He had touched that car with the same hands that used to hold mine when he was little and scared, and now he was the one who might be scared, alone, maybe hurt, maybe worse, and I had no time to wonder. I only had time to move. The road stretched out in front of me, long and still, but inside me everything was shaking. I could barely feel the wheel under my hands, and the air in the car seemed too thick to breathe, but I kept going faster than I should, because love has no patience when danger calls. I kept hearing the stranger's voice over and over, and it made no sense. He had said he found my son's phone on the ground near a ditch. He had said the motorcycle he rode was on its side and the headlight was still shining into the grass, and then he said he did not see my son right away, and those words kept echoing because they felt wrong. They felt like a warning that something was unfolding that I was not prepared to face. But as I drove, something else rose up in me, a strength I did not ask for but needed, and it started to push back against the fear, because I knew my son. I knew the boy who grew into a young man with a stubborn spirit and a soft heart. I knew the child who once climbed a tree too high and fell but got up laughing even while I cried. I knew the teenager who once walked home in the rain because he had given his jacket to a friend. I knew the man who earlier that morning crouched beside my car and said the brakes sounded off, but his voice had carried something else, worry, something he tried to hide, and now I could hear it louder than ever. He was trying to protect me from something he had not wanted to mention, something tied to that tracker, and now I was driving toward a truth he had tried to face alone, and that thought filled me with a heat that burned right through the fear. Because a mother will forgive anything except being left in the dark when her child is fighting danger alone. And as I drove I felt something shift in me, just like that. I was no longer the confused mother who found a tracker on her car. I was no longer the woman who wondered why her son was acting strange or why he kept checking things he had never cared about before. No, I became the mother who would not stop until she found him and ripped the truth open with her bare hands if she had to, and that shift was powerful enough to steady my breathing and clear my eyes and focus my mind. Every mile I drove felt like a test of how far a mother's love can stretch, and every moment I thought about what might have happened tore at me, but I did not let it break me, because breaking was not an option, not when my child needed me, not when something dangerous wrapped its shadow around him. I even whispered a promise into the air that if I found him safe I would drag the truth out of him no matter how hard he tried to hide it, and something about saying that out loud made me feel stronger, like the earth beneath me had settled again. And then finally I saw the lights flashing blue and white against the trees, and I saw strangers gathered near the ditch, and I saw the motorcycle lying in the grass just like the caller described. And when I pulled over and ran out of the car, something inside me lit up fierce, because my son was not in sight, and that could have shattered me, but instead it pushed me even harder, because if he was on his feet or calling for help or fighting to get back to the road, then I would find him, and if he was hurt then I would hold him, and if someone had done something to him, well, God help them, because a mother with fear behind her and love in front of her is a force no one wants to cross. That was the moment I understood key point 5 completely and fully, that moment when fear tried to swallow me whole but love shoved it aside, that moment when chaos screamed but something ancient inside me roared louder, that moment when I realized I was no longer running from danger, I was running toward my child, and nothing in this world or the next could hold me back. When I reached that ditch and saw the flashing lights dancing across the wet grass, something inside me steadied and snapped all at once, because this next moment was not about fear anymore, it was about truth, and truth has a way of standing in the open bold as day even when the world around it shakes and trembles, and I felt that truth rising up inside me while I searched the shadows for my son's face, and I kept calling his name louder and louder, not with panic but with a force that came from the deepest part of a mother who refuses to give up even when the road goes dark. I moved past the motorcycle lying on its side, its frame still warm, its headlight flickering like a heartbeat, and I could almost hear his voice in the memory of that morning when he had said he would be out for just a short ride and that he needed some air, and for the first time I realized those words were not a simple excuse, no, they were a shield meant to keep me from asking too many questions, and that hit me hard because he had been battling something bigger than he wanted me to know, and he had chosen to carry the weight alone, and that is a kind of bravery but also a kind of heartbreak. And as I moved closer toward the cluster of strangers, I felt the truth creeping closer to me step by step. One of the officers approached me, but I brushed past him because I did not want explanations. I wanted to find my son with my own eyes, and I wanted to see exactly what had happened, and I wanted the truth without soft edges, because when someone you love is in danger the truth cannot be gentle. And I kept moving until I reached the tall grass near the ditch, and there I finally saw him, my boy, sitting upright with his head bowed and his arms resting on his knees like he was trying to hold himself together. And when he heard my footsteps he lifted his face, and the look in his eyes broke something in me, but it also healed something at the same time, because he was alive. He was bruised, he was shaken, but he was alive. I fell to my knees next to him and reached out to touch his face, and he leaned into my hand like he was 5 years old again, scared in the night, asking if the thunder would ever stop. And for a moment the world grew quiet around us, and it was just mother and child in a circle of stillness while the storm of the day settled behind us, and I felt gratitude rise up in my chest, raw and unfiltered, but right behind it came something else, a question that carried too much weight to ignore, and I asked him softly what happened and why he had been following me, and what danger had wrapped itself so tightly around our lives that he thought he had to track my car without telling me. He looked down at the ground like the truth was written there, and he was reading it one slow painful line at a time, and then he told me everything in a voice that trembled but did not break, because he had been holding this truth alone for too long. He said someone had been threatening him, someone he used to trust, someone who had started following me instead when my son refused to go along with something he knew was wrong, and that person had sent him messages warning him that if he stepped out of line again they would come for me. And those words hit me like a blow straight to the heart, because suddenly everything made sense. The strange heaviness in his tone, the way he insisted on checking my brakes, the tracker he hid on my car, the look in his eyes that morning when he told me to be careful, all of it came crashing together into one sharp, undeniable truth. He was not spying on me, he was protecting me with every ounce of strength he had. And when he told me he tried to confront that person earlier that day, but it turned into a chase, and he had lost control of the bike for a moment and skidded into the ditch, my breath caught deep in my chest, because that meant danger was not far away. It meant this story was not done, and as I held his hand I felt the tremor running through him, not from the crash but from the fear of what might come next. And in that moment something powerful rose up inside me, more powerful than anger, more powerful than fear. It was the unshakable truth that we would not let this shadow follow us another inch. I told him we were going to handle this together, not with secrets, not with fear, but with strength and clarity and the full force of family standing united. And I watched his shoulders drop with relief, because he finally realized he did not have to carry this fight alone anymore. And that moment changed everything, because love can lift burdens that fear tries to bury, and mothers know how to stare danger in the face and make it back down. The officers came over to talk to us, and for the first time I let them, because now the truth had a shape and a name and a direction, and I was ready to face it head on, and my son was ready too. And that was the sixth point, the one I did not know I needed to learn until life forced it into my hands. The power that comes when truth rises above fear and stands in the open, the power that shows up when family chooses unity over silence, the power that appears when a mother refuses to surrender to threats and decides to fight with love as sharp as a blade. See, danger can chase you, fear can shake you, darkness can follow you, but nothing stands stronger than the moment you claim the truth and step into it without backing down. And that night, kneeling beside my son while the wind rustled through the trees and the officers waited to hear our story, I understood something simple but mighty: the kind of love that protects can also heal, and the kind of truth that hurts can also free, and the kind of fear that once seemed unstoppable can fall apart the moment two hearts decide they will face it together instead of alone. I helped my son to his feet, and he leaned on me, not because he was too weak to stand, but because he finally knew he did not have to pretend to be unbreakable anymore. And that was the miracle hidden in all the chaos. The accident forced him to stop carrying shadows in silence, and it forced me to see the truth he had been burying under layers of worry and pride and stubborn courage. And once that truth showed itself, we could finally fight back as a family, and nothing could scare me more than the thought of losing him, and nothing could strengthen me more than the chance to protect him. And as we walked toward the patrol car that would take us to the station to share every detail and every threat and every message with the officers, I felt the truth settle inside me, calm and steady like a flame that would not go out no matter how hard the wind pushed. And I held my son's hand with a grip that promised him he would never fight alone again, and I whispered something only he could hear, something small but strong. I told him he was loved, he was safe, and we would finish this fight together. And his breath steadied and his heart eased, and the night around us seemed to soften and pull back its shadows. That is what Key Point 6 taught me: that truth may hide for a while, but it never loses its voice, and love may tremble for a moment, but it never loses its strength, and fear may threaten to swallow you, but it cannot win when family stands united with their hearts uncovered and their courage rising like the sun. And that was the moment I knew without hesitation that we were going to come out of this not broken, not shaken, but stronger than before, because once truth enters the room, fear has to find the door.